This is the Anacortes City Council meeting for June 4th. Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Walters?
Here.
Mrs. Pickett?
Here.
Mr. Adams?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
Here.
Mrs. Richardson?
Here.
Mr. Gear?
Here.
Would you join me for the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda tonight are the minutes of May 21st and May 29th. Council members?
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to approve. Second.
A motion by Mr. Gear, second by Mr. Adams. Any further discussion, corrections? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Mrs. Pickett?
Yes.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yes.
Mr. Gear?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is our citizens' hearings portion of the agenda. Anyone that wishes to comment on any item not on the regular agenda? If not, we'll move to our council communication and committee reports.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Turner.
just wanted to say something about the Waterfront Festival. It was rainy, but it was, I think, very successful. I know this because my morning Rotary Club does the children's boat building project. They make little boats. We go to two different trust companies and they give us the ends. It's Laos Trust and Tri-County. They give us the leftover pieces. We take them to the wood shop. The people up at the high school make us these boats. We used to do it ourselves, but they do really a better job than we do. We have 1,500 of them, and we use 1,500 in 2 days. And it's basically a steady stream of kids going through there for the whole time we're there and pounding away. And it's kind of the simplest little thing, but it's the most enjoyable that I see kids have more fun with that, just taking hammers. But so I'm real pleased to see that it all worked out again.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Mr. Mayor, speaking of kids having fun, the Public Works had an open house at the wastewater treatment plant on Friday, and you have never seen such big smiles as on these kids who got to ride in a dump truck or a garbage truck. Their eyes were so big and they just felt so important, and it was really fun to see.
Great. Thank you. The City of Anacortes also got an award, community partnership award on Friday night from the Port of Anacortes, and they just wanted to pass along their thanks for the city's help with their stormwater infrastructure and the lawsuit that pushed them to come to the city for help with stormwater. So that worked out well, and we're grateful that they acknowledged that.
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Richardson.
happy birthday.
Hey, thank you. I don't need any more birthdays.
Me too.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Walters.
The Planning Committee met this afternoon. We are now meeting twice per month. We've adjusted our schedule, so we'll be meeting next Monday as well. Our new schedule is the first and second Mondays of the month at 5 p.m. Meeting room over there. I also assume actually that means if a council meeting in the first 2 weeks of the month falls on a Tuesday, that we'll meet on a Tuesday. So there are a number of things that we're doing. We're looking at all the permitted and conditional uses in each residential zone, looking at putting those uses in a table format so you can easily see where different types of uses are permitted, where they're conditional, and then where we will be able to see which ones are missing, which ones should be allowed in a zone, where it's unusual for something to be allowed in a zone, and also where different uses in different zones are defined slightly differently. We're going through each chapter, each zone, looking for conditional uses that shouldn't be there, or other simple fixes that need to be made in terms of the listed uses or the definitions of those uses. And there's a lot of different discussion about in what order we're going to do those things, and which is higher priority, and what is the best approach to this review of the code. We're also working on the definition of an assisted living care facility, and Mr. Larson brought us 6 pages of definitions from other jurisdictions, how they define assisted living care facility or other uses like that. And there's a lot to work through. Which of these jurisdictions have elements in those definitions that we are interested in using in our own. So our plan in the committee is to sort through that, decide what aspects of those types of uses we want to be able to regulate through the land use code, which we're not interested, where to put those, that kind of thing. And we, as a committee, want to meet in study session with the City Council next week so that we can provide more in-depth detail of that to the entire council, maybe get some feedback from the entire council on how to proceed there, and also talk about any kind of moratorium that we might want to impose on an assisted living care facility.
I'll need to check the agenda for next week, and I'd like to see all this in a written report before we spring it on anybody. The subcommittee doesn't have the authority to make decisions for the full council, and I think you owe the rest of the council an opportunity to review your recommendations. That's the way we do things around here.
Yeah, we're not making a recommendation for the entire council at this time. What we were interested in doing was presenting in a study session where we have an opportunity to present to the council.
And I'll check the agenda. I'm not sure next Monday night will work.
Okay, three of us.
Are other things scheduled on the agendas well in advance?
Yeah, three of us indicated we did want to have this on the agenda, and under our rules of procedure, 3 members.
If there's room, we'll put it on.
I would really appreciate if you would find room, since
I'll
3
check
members.
the agenda.
Thank you. However, I do want to make it clear that 3 members, under our rules of procedure,
I don't
have
care
asked for that.
if there are other items on the agenda that take prerequisite over your items, we'll schedule it.
I imagine that those items are not
Mr. Walters,
particularly high
end of
priority since
discussion.
they are on the study session agenda and not a regular agenda where they could be approved summarily by the council. So
We don't
I don't
schedule
see a
or
need.
surprise people
I don't
a
see a
week
need
in
to have an
advance.
argument at this session about what should or should
We're
not
not
be
going to
on
have
the
an argument.
agenda.
I'll control the agenda. If there's room, we'll put it on. If there's not, we won't.
Under our own rules of procedure, the city council and 3 members of same can add an item to the agenda.
Mr. Mayor?
That is what we have requested for the study session.
I haven't seen a request, first of all.
We can put that in writing for you so that you'll have that.
Do that. Put it in writing, please. And we'll deal with it when it comes in. Mr. Chern?
Thank you.
Comment?
That concludes my report.
Mr. Walters, it's arrogant of you to suppose that you can
No.
just jump right in here and tell us what we've been doing for several years and change it in a week, whether it needs to be, whether it's existing rule or not. Why don't we just discuss at some other appropriate venue before you launch into some
This is a
discussion
report.
like this? I would appreciate it very much.
This is a report of the committee. This isn't,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Mrs. Richardson.
the committee felt that it was useful to update the whole council on some of the things that we are thinking about doing, and
don't
we'd like an
disagree.
opportunity to do that.
And we'll find a spot for you.
And that way the council as a whole can direct the committee as to what the priorities are for the whole council, so that we are not making decisions for the council.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Gear?
I think there's, based on there's a perception that we want to stay away from. Outside of what we're talking about here, there's a perception that we need to stay away from, that councils are directing, our committees are directing council. I think we're getting dangerously close to committees wanting to do real work and dig in and get things done, when the council should be directing committees. And that happens by committees saying, okay, here's an idea, let's bring it to council. Council vets everything and directs committee.
Exactly.
I'm all for digging into and straightening things out. I just want to stay away from the perception that no matter what committee it is, that committees are making decisions, directing council, without council really getting into the gist of what the direction is. Just my 2 cents. I just want to stay away from that perception.
Okay, let's move on. Any other item under Mayor Council communication?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Gear?
Public Works Committee met today, discussing the 3 million gallon tank project up at Blue Heron Circle. There's some work that needs to be done. We're discussing opportunities to build another tank temporarily, or even have 2 tanks up there. Still some discussion on how that's going to happen. Basin mitigation plan that Fred brought up last week. We'll be moving forward hopefully to the county, and the best we can do is put our best foot forward and say, here's a great plan, and hope the county follows through with helping those people out in the basin. Water treatment plant shutdown recap. We did a tie-in shutdown. Zero effect. They did a fantastic job there, and that project is doing really well. 0.8%. What was the percentage of change orders? Just minute. It's fantastic. We talked about 15-minute parking around the post office to come around the corner to the driveway area where the mailbox is. Probably doing a couple 15-minute parking spots there to help facilitate moving in and out and not so much blockage. Skagit County Transfer Station, Public Works directors from the county will be touring that. It's just about complete. That'll be a nice upgrade. Also, safe routes to schools projects for I Avenue and 32nd and M Avenue. Some great development going on there to make it safer, sidewalks, traffic calming devices. Also a one-way I Avenue turning into a one-way street with a nice pedestrian bike lane also in there. But overall, that's it. Some miscellaneous stuff on the Guimas Channel Trail updates that we were all updated on last week, but that's the bulk of Public Works.
Mr. Gear, Mr. Mayor.
Would you like to? Mr. Johnson?
Did you mention the 9th Street repaving?
Oh, I didn't.
Okay, please, go ahead.
Well, 9th Street, as you know, along 9th Street, Calico covered, those sidewalks are pretty nasty with the roots that are coming up. So there's some leftover pavers from the Plaza project, and working with Strandberg Construction, we found, what's that? Possibly, thank you. Possibly working with them to see what we can do. That's a small enough project to use them, and actually taking up all that sidewalk from the entire 9th Street from Commercial to Q Avenue, and working with Calico cupboard owners to really mitigate the tripping hazards in there. Just something, I won't say temporary fix, because the pavers could be a long-term thing for a while till we find money, but it reduces the tripping hazard. And thanks for reminding me. Appreciate it.
Okay. Ms. Pickett?
I'd just like to mention that some of us were in attendance at the Envision Skagit meeting last week, and that's been a very valuable project, I think. One of the things I learned was that in choosing the people who sat on the committee that worked through this planning document for the next 50 years for the county did their best to choose citizens who really didn't have any particular axe to grind. So they were a real heterogeneous bunch of folks that went all over the county and listening to people and studying things. And I think they've done a great job on the document. I believe it's online.
It is, thank you. Anything else under Mayor Council communication? If not, we'll move to the consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda. Vouchers and the warrants, accept as complete the Depot Site Plaza Phase 2, and a street fair request for Relay for Life.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Johnson.
I'd like to withdraw the street fair request from the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you. That leaves approval of the vouchers and accept as complete the Depot Site Plaza Phase 2.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Turner.
I move we accept the remaining ones, A and B, for passing.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Turner, a second by Mr. Adams to approve items A and B on the consent agenda. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Pickett?
Yes.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yes.
Mr. Gear?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
We had a discussion during the Public Works Committee meeting about this application for the street fair, and noted that the businesses contacted only included Read Me a Story, and there's the Seaport shop on that street, and the Opulence Salon is also right there in the corner with parking, I'm sure, that's being used for that. And I just wanted to ensure that these businesses were contacted before that started, not so much as to stop the street fair, which I think is a great thing, but just in order to ensure that they're contacted and are aware that this is coming their way. Okay. With that, I'd like to make a motion to approve it.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Johnson and a second by Ms. Richardson. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yes.
Mr. Gear?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Mrs. Pickett?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Buckenmeyer, you'll contact the chamber and make sure they contact those businesses? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Mrs. Richardson?
Just for the public listening who might not have read the details of this, it is just 2 hours on one particular day from 5 to 7 p.m., so it's not like a whole weekend or anything like
On
that.
the 8th of June, I believe.
June 8th.
Friday, right?
Okay, good. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, item 7A under new business, is a closed record review and decision for conditional use permit for dog training and dog daycare at 3119 Molly Lane. Mr. Meismer will present for the council in the audience.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council and the audience. The Smarter Than Your Dog conditional use permit application consists of a request to conduct dog training and dog daycare business in an existing building located in the LM1 use zone. The proposed use consists of private and group session dog and owner training, dog daycare, periodic community education programs related to canine care, and limited retail use also related to the training activities. The use would occupy 2 sites, and you can see from the overhead, this is the building. This overhead shows the actual 2 areas that will be leased and highlighted in yellow, and it comprises approximately 3,000 square feet. The 2 suites located again at 9119 Molly Lane. The planning department received written comments from several of the neighboring condominium owners in regards to sanitation, parking, barking, and control of the dogs. The applicant provided oral responses and written responses at the Planning Commission to each of those concerns. The applicant, along with 4 members of the audience, spoke in favor, of course, of the request, and no one spoke in opposition. The one item that the Planning Commissioners were also concerned about was the outdoor area, the outdoor dog waste elimination area, if you will, currently proposed at the north end of the building. And many of the concerns, of course, are related to, there is a wetland, adjacent parcel. So wetlands and buffers are quite close in there. And so the concern was if bleaches or other things were used to reduce that area where the dogs would be outside, how would that impact the wetlands? And so through the discussions with the Planning Commission, the commissioners came up with a condition to hopefully address that, which would be that the Public Works Department would review information provided by the applicant and how any environmental issues may need to be dealt with and or what mitigation measures may need to take place from those potential impacts, if any. The one thing I would like to mention is that the proposed use is not specifically listed as a conditional use in the LM1 use zone. However, it is similar to a kennel and therefore appropriate under the conditional use permitting process for consideration as conditional use in this zone. The Planning Commission did hold an open record public hearing on May 9, 2012 and recommended approval of the proposed request with 5 conditions to the City Council, and there have been no appeals or any other comments received since that meeting. With that, it was a very brief presentation, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Johnson.
See in the attachments that the waste facility for the dogs is going to be, it's a waste contained facility. It sounds, for lack of a better term, like a giant kitty litter facility almost. Everything kind of stays inside. The solid waste gets carried off of the transfer station, and everything else is kind of cleaned and out. So it doesn't really go outside the confines of that area, as I understand it. Is that your understanding too?
That's correct. Some of the concerns from the Planning Commission was that, you know, during rainy periods, or if in fact they were to hose the area off, that there could be some problems with bleach or whatever leaching its way towards the wetlands. There has been some research done through the Skagit County Health Department in regards to that, and I'm certain that we would be able to work out any of those issues with Public Works Department and the applicant as the project moves forward, if it does.
Right. Great. Other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Adams?
Yeah, Mr. Miesemer, is this going to just be a daytime operation? There won't be any dogs there at night?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so we won't have any nighttime barking issues, just from your understanding. Okay. I just wanted to mention, I thought the packet was well presented, so thanks for that.
Mr. Mayor?
Mrs. Richardson?
This is a zone in the city in which kennels are allowed, and the fact that this is as similar to a kennel as anything can be, with the exception that the dogs don't stay overnight. I think it was an appropriate decision of the planning department to say that this was a similar use that could move forward through the process, and it's among other mini storage and industrial sorts of uses not far from the fire station and so on. So I think it's obviously a location that's not going to impact any residential neighborhood. So I think it's a good choice for that location, and I move that we approve this conditional use application.
Second.
Mr. Mayor.
We have a motion
Mr.
by,
Mayor.
I'm sorry.
This is a closed record.
Oh.
You should allow the applicant an opportunity to speak. And
I'm
those
sorry.
members who are
I thought the mayor had already
parties of record.
determined nobody was going to speak, so I apologize for jumping the gun.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to, Ryan.
Close record?
No appeals.
Under our current process.
Correct, your code, but it's a closed record, and you should allow. But it's up to.
Well, I think I'm hearing an affirmative motion and a second. So, you know, I think in a different situation, we're not going to hear from any appellants. So I'm going to accept the motion and the second motion by Mrs. Richardson, and I believe I heard a second from Mr. Turner. Mr. Furlong, does that meet your criteria?
I am happy as a clam, Your Honor. I'm like a good clam, I'm keeping my mouth shut.
Okay, very good. We do have a motion and a second to approve the conditional use for the dog training and dog daycare. Any other questions or comments from council members? If not, call the roll, please.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yes.
Mr. Gear?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Mrs. Pickett?
Yes.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Congratulations. Thank you. Next item on the agenda tonight are council deliberations on the docket for our 2012 Comprehensive Development Regulation Amendments. Mr. Larson.
Mayor, council, and members of the audience, thanks for being here tonight. I would first like to start off, this is for the 2012 docket process, first of all, and these are the amendments that we received between January-ish and March of this year and then went to the Planning Commission. Now it's before the City Council is considered to set the docket. Would first like to start by saying that Evergreen Islands did submit a proposal that was originally Exhibit 4, and they withdrew that, so that proposal is not being considered, and that was done prior to the Planning Commission meeting, so the Planning Commission did nothing with it as well. With that, I will review the 2 remaining proposed code amendments to the development regulations and the 1 proposed amendment to the comprehensive plan. I will also review the proposed schedule for this year, 2012 amendment cycle, and what is expected from tonight's meeting. After staff's presentation, council can ask questions regarding any of the proposed amendments of staff. The Planning Commission held the public hearing on the docket on April 25th, 2012, and recommended moving all amendments forward through this year's process. Council should make individual motions to each of the amendments to establish this year's docket and the proposed schedule, which is on the screen currently. We will prepare, if whatever motions the council does make, staff will prepare a resolution for council's consideration. We'll put under the consent agenda at the next regular meeting, so whatever you move forward, we'll establish a resolution which sets the docket, and we'll bring that to the consent agenda. Council will not take any testimony tonight. The commission held the required public hearing, as we did last year. It's the same exact process we've had for the last years, and starting to get consistent with it. Also, staff would like to clarify that by making a motion to place an exhibit on the docket is neither approving nor denying the proposed amendment at this time. The council is simply establishing the docket, which allows staff to begin environmental review and then have the required public hearings. The proposed amendment schedule highlights the anticipated dates of the proposed amendments. I've provided the council with the proposed schedule on the screen. As you can tell, the Planning Commission did hold their public hearing on the 25th of April. The council's holding the recommendations tonight on what they would like to move forward. If you move any forward, we'll bring a resolution to the next regular session and put that on the consent agenda, and that will start the process. After that's done, somewhere between July and August, staff will do environmental review. Then the Planning Commission's anticipated to do their review in September, October, come back to the City Council, and then, as usual, adopt an ordinance at the end of the year, first part of 2013. With that, I'd like to just highlight each of the 3 remaining exhibits. Exhibit 1, which was submitted by Terry Christensen. The document contains extensive proposed revisions to comments on Title 17. The submitted document is not a strike-through underline format and does not contain specific proposed rewrites of sections. Does contain specific rewrites of proposed sections as well as suggested changes to some sections. So in those instances, it just says, I think we should change it, but doesn't provide any suggested language. The council is currently in the process of reviewing proposed changes to Title 17, 16, 18, etc. as part of the 2010 amendment cycle, and these revisions have not yet been finalized. Therefore, the final configuration of 17 is not quite finished, so there could be some complications as we move this process forward along with the proposed changes from this amendment. In light of the extensive nature of the proposed revisions, comments, and review process currently occurring with the 16, 17, 18, and new 19, staff did recommended to Planning Commission that they deny the proposal this year, send it to the Council Planning Subcommittee, have the subcommittee just kind of go through each one saying this is a good idea, not a good idea, and just pick those ones that they thought were good ideas, package them up, and then bring them through another process. So that's what staff was recommending. The Planning Commission did vote, and they voted 3-2 in favor of moving the entire document forward. So with that, I'll move on to Exhibit 2. Exhibit 2, staff is proposing some minor changes to the comprehensive plan on pages 10, or pages 2 and 10, which are to some goals, and under the goals it refers to some specific dates that are incorrect and some document wording that need to be corrected. It's very more Scrivener stuff than anything, just to clean it up. The Planning Commission did make a motion on this one, and they supported it 5-0 to move that one forward. And then the final recommendation is staff is proposing a new addition, definitions and regulations addressing adult entertainment. Definitions will be added to 17-06077, and the placement of for the actual ordinance has not been decided within Title 17. That would just kind of be adding some numbers there. And then the other big thing that was not decided is how far should adult entertainment facilities be located from another facilities like churches, schools, public places, those kinds of things. The Planning Commission did make a motion on that one and also supported that 5-0, moving that one forward to this year's docket. Finally, staff also recommends to the council to approve this general schedule for consideration as we move it through the process this year. With that, staff would take any questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Mrs. Richards.
Mr. Larson, I'd just like to ask a more general question about procedures, because it's, even though these items were proposed as part of the annual amendment review process, I understand that development regulations are not restricted to going through on that process. So is it possible for us to recommend that one or the other of these move forward immediately and others take more time?
That'd be up to the council to do that.
But there's no reason they can't be pulled apart, and we could say, we think this is important to address sooner, and these could be addressed on that schedule or some other schedule.
Theoretically, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Larson?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Adams?
Mr. Larson, I have a question on Exhibit 1. So the staff recommendation is to deny it to the docket and go to the Planning Committee to just do a general review.
Correct.
What would be the difference of doing that or postponing the docket? Yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter to me how we do it, as long as it gets the consideration. As long as it gets looked at, there's consideration made, and then it gets brought to the full council at some point to be able to decide if it's if the items in his proposal are should move forward or not.
I think the idea I had is there are, again, several sections in there. It just says, I think we should make a change. It doesn't give you clarity of exactly what the change should be. It would give the council planning subcommittee the opportunity to say, you know what, that's a good idea. Let's work on that one. Or that's not a good idea. Let's set that one aside. I can't remember exactly how many proposed changes. I think there's well over 100 and some odd changes. You might be able to whittle that down to 25 or 30 or 50 or whatever the number is, which would give that committee an opportunity to say, you know, here's what I think the council should consider. Give it to the council and say, yeah, these are good ideas, and then we could start it back through a process. It would give that opportunity to clarify what would.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question maybe for our attorney, and that is that I noticed a whole raft of the suggestions have to do with definitions, and I'm really almost past the point of wanting to draft definitions here. I mean, I think that might be a job for somebody who's got more of a legal background, but.
Well, yeah, definitions are tricky, and they're also really form the foundation of one of these codes. How you define things really does make a difference, and they tend to ripple through the code if the definitions change, so they have to be very carefully studied. Typically, in that sort of a situation, one would expect the planning staff to take a look at how that might go, consult with council to the extent necessary, and then try to present what the implications would be to the Planning Commission when they make their review. So by the time this gets up to the council, it should be very well vetted. Although, knowing this council, you guys have very eagle eyes, and there probably still will be some questions to be answered. But that would be the typical process for that to go through. Changing definitions is, it seems innocent, seems like, oh, what's the big deal? Yeah. But the implications can be much larger than you expect. So care is in order.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Johnson.
I got a question about timing for this. It's Title 17 edits. We're due for a comprehensive plan review published by 2015, I believe. And that would indicate that we would want to start looking at this in about 2013 to start thinking about what the changes should be in the comprehensive plan, if any. And you said that some of the questions Mr. Christensen had was, I think, this particular paragraph needs a change, but the question is a change based on what? And the foundational element, it would appear to be the comprehensive plan. And if we're planning to change, or at least work on the comprehensive plan, I think we should work on that first, determine what the foundation of all this, of Chapter 17 will be, and then in light of that, do the edits on Title 17. They may take a year or two longer, but then we'll at least have a solid foundation from which to build Chapter 17, rather than turn the process around, where the Chapter 17 drives the comp plan, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And that's the standard process most cities use, correct?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Turner.
Briefly, the number of changes that, in number one here, and the number of things that have been asked for, and the complexity of it all, and the definitions, it just leads me to believe that we should take a lot of time to review this, and not try to do it this year, but that we could start the process in the planning committee. I think that was the intent, to give us as much time to begin that process based upon their schedule, and then just keep moving that forward, but tackle this next year or even further. Correct.
Part of the comp plan.
Because that's I like your reasoning a lot.
Mr. Mayor.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yeah, as Mr. Walters said in his committee report, one of the things that the planning committee has taken on as a task we want to work on is some of these conditional uses and permitted uses and so on. And it seems like a really good idea to fold Mr. Christensen's ideas into that discussion at the committee level, and then there may be a number of cases where Terry's suggestions will be exactly what the committee thinks is needed. In other cases, they may ask a question that leads us to determine that something else is needed, and to fold it all into a coordinated process seems to me much more intelligent than trying to have two parallel processes going in different directions. So I would support the idea of referring this to the committee to consider, along with the other things that we're considering over the next several months, and then come back periodically to the whole council with reports as to things that we're discovering as we go through the process, and eventually come up with a coordinated recommendation rather than just several shots in the dark.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Gear,
Sir.
go ahead.
I pretty much agree with everything. I think Erica kind of hit home with me the most about taking our time and really not just throwing definitions out there that could really come back to hurt us down the road. You know, our job as elected officials is to guide this, and we take suggestions and we work with suggestions, and I think through committee is the appropriate process. I think I would have to agree that if we take on number one right now based on everything else we're doing, that could really kind of confuse the process. And I would be in favor of taking number one off and sending it to committee.
Want to move that?
I'll make a motion to do that. Yeah.
I second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to take item number one off the docket, send it to the planning committee.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Adams, we have a motion and a second relative.
Thank you. I just had a question. Okay, if we do deny this to the docket, it's just going to take us a different path, but that some of the things that Terry, if the ideas turn out to be good ideas that we want to layer into Title 17, it eventually will make it to the Planning Commission.
It could.
Correct.
It could.
Yep.
So the process is still going to work. It's just taking a little different route, and we're going to put the time into it that we need to. Okay.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr.
Just
Gear?
to follow up with that, there's some items in there that are more focused, and there's some that are very vague. And so my concern is that we get it up here and we start beating it up, so.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Walters.
I think it's important to drive home the point that there are two types of proposals here proposed for inclusion in the docket, as we talked about, Mrs. Richardson mentioned earlier. There's the development regulation proposals, which are Exhibit 1, Mr. Christensen's, and also the adult entertainment ordinance proposal.
We're not dealing with that right now. That's coming up.
Okay. And the comprehensive plan amendment, which is Exhibit 2.
That'll be the next 2 items. We're going to take them separately.
Okay. So there are both of those types of regulations. Development regulations can be passed at any time. They go through a process, but they can be adopted at any time. Comp plan amendments can only be adopted once per year. So I don't have a problem with taking that development regulation, Exhibit 1, Mr. Christensen's proposal, taking it off the docket, because I do think it will be somewhat problematic to be processing it at the same time as we're processing other amendments to Title 17, 18, 19. But so long as the Planning Committee actually does work on that and moves that forward, because I mean, there's been quite a few comments about the importance of getting these things right, and I think that makes a lot of sense. It is important to get these things right, but it's not the new code that's going to hurt us so much as our existing code. It's our existing definitions. We have to do work on these things now, and so long as we're going to do that by referring it to the Planning Committee, I'm supportive of not including it in the docket.
In any event, whatever we do, we'll get a legal review. You know, I hear people on the street every day that talk about what a beautiful community this is. It's amazing we were able to build this community with the current code, given all its irregularities and problems. Anyway, very good. So we have a motion and a second. Mr. Furlong.
No, I just noticed that you hadn't voted. I thought you were moving on. You're a step ahead of me as usual, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Furlong. We have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yes.
Mr. Gear?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Mrs. Pickett?
Yes.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
We use modified Robert's Rules of Order, so you know that, don't you? Works for me.
Maxwell Furlong.
How would you like to handle the other 2 items? You want to handle them? You going to give a little background?
Mayor.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Nope. Just, I've already briefly discussed them, and if there's any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Walters?
I don't think that we should include this one in the docket. It's the only one that must be included in a docket because it's a comprehensive plan amendment. There's a long list of references in the comprehensive plan, other plans and policies that are incorporated by reference in the comprehensive plan, and basically all of them are out of date. We have subsequently adopted newer plans and policies. So at first glance, of course, it makes sense that those references should be updated such that all the dates are correct. However, I've consistently heard that we don't have sufficient planning staff to do a lot of the things that the planning committee would like to work on, and if that's the case, I don't think that we should be spending our time on this, which is already out of date and has been out of date for quite a while. Second, I don't think that we should be updating these without carefully reviewing each of the plans and policies that is listed there. There's a lot of risk in terms of Appeals to Growth Management Hearings Board for incorporating a bunch of documents by reference. And every development regulation we pass subsequently needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, and thus the documents we incorporated by reference in the comprehensive plan. So to the extent that we can remove any of those references, we should be doing that rather than simply updating the dates. So my motion is that we not incorporate this into the docket.
I think we've already covered the legal ground.
For the sake of discussion, I'll second the motion so that we can discuss it.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Adams.
Well, we do already have an established procedure that was being proposed tonight to if we did put these on the docket, they would follow this process here.
Correct.
We have used that process in the past, and it's worked pretty well. So I guess I'm wondering why we want to change that tonight.
I don't know
Or
that.
why there's a proposal to change the procedure that I thought this was what we were going into tonight. So
Mr. Mayor.
You know, it's fun to throw surprises out at council meetings. It's always better to have a little conversation, perhaps before the meeting, but that doesn't seem to be the path that we want to take here. I can't quite understand that. I think we're all collectively working to do the same thing. Mr. Walters, you had a comment, and Mrs. Richardson?
I'm certainly not proposing to change the process. The process is that each of these proposals comes to the council for decision on whether or not to be included in the docket. I'm suggesting we not include it in the docket.
Thank you.
There doesn't seem to be a reason to do so, actually, that is very pressing. If there is one, I'm not aware of it.
Well, staff has recommended that we move this forward. Mrs. Richardson?
Mr. Mayor, I think it makes sense to keep it on the docket and to move it through the process for this reason. The references in the code currently are to outdated documents. I think by including it and reviewing through the schedule that we've listed there, which goes through early next year, will give us time, as Mr. Walters suggested, to make sure that we have looked at the updated document and confirmed that, in fact, it is appropriate to keep it in our code. And if not, we could consider, as part of this process, for example, deleting these 3 documents and not referencing them in our comp plan anymore. I think a related question is the timing of adopting a comp plan amendment, because if I understand correctly, according to state law, we can only adopt comp plan amendments once a year. And even if we determine through this process that we want to make these changes, we might want to consider making the actual adoption of the changes later in the year, in the event we have other things that come up that we might want to include in one action to amend the comp plan. And that's not something that we need to even think about tonight, but a timing issue that we can consider as we go through the process. So I would like to take a closer look at whether we need all these, but this offers us an opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Turner?
I think we started working on the idea of working on number 2 there because of some dissatisfaction with some irregularities in our code. The dates were not quite exactly right from what we've been hearing, and I don't want to stop that process because we might have some disagreement in the future about some other aspect of it. I think that's ludicrous. I think we should move forward with this on the docket and do what we intended to do, and we can keep moving forward to change whatever we need to change in the future time. So that's my opinion.
Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Walters?
I think Mrs. Richardson's suggestion is a good alternate pathway to my motion. The important consideration is the opportunity cost of working on this item.
Mr. Mayor, I call for the question.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second to remove this from the docket. So we'll vote on that motion first.
So, Mr. Mayor, a negative vote would be to keep it on the docket.
Correct.
Mr. Gear?
No.
Mr. Johnson?
No.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Mrs. Pickett?
No.
Mr. Adams?
No.
Mr. Turner?
No.
Mrs. Richardson?
No.
Thank you. Motion would be in order.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that exhibit number 2 be placed on the docket.
We'll do this twice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion on the
Second.
and a second. A motion by Mr. Gear, a second by Mrs. Richardson. Further questions or discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Walters?
No.
Mrs. Pickett?
Yes.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yes.
Mr. Gear?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 3, Mr. Walters. Mr. Larson, sorry. I didn't mean to infer that,
Just say Ryan, you get them all.
yeah.
Exhibit 3 was the addition of an adult entertainment ordinance, adding definitions and specific sections to Title 19.
Mr. Mayor?
Mrs. Richardson.
On this one, I would like to suggest that we actually move this forward more expeditiously and not include it in this schedule. I think it would be useful to the community to have an adult entertainment ordinance on the books sooner than next February. And by not officially including it in the docket, we could move it forward at a time determined by staff that it fits into the schedule. So I would move that we do not put it on the docket on that schedule, but do consider the ordinance in a timely manner.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Richardson, a second by Mr. Walters.
So, Mr. Mayor,
Mr.
I just
Gear.
want to make sure that this is going to come forward sooner.
Yes.
I just want to make sure.
So I will talk to Mr. Furlong on I will talk to Mr. Furlong after the meeting.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Any other questions or discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Adams?
so this timeline that was for the docket, did that seem to fit the timeline that you needed for this? Well, I know it's up to the council.
I can get this. This one's not fairly complicated. It's fairly straightforward. So it's a model ordinance after Kennewick, and several other cities has the same exact ordinance. So it's pretty straightforward.
We may need to do some additional work, though. So we have a motion and a second. And then just explain Ms. Richardson's
Okay, my suggestion.
line of thought. We're required to have this ordinance so we can designate if we get a request. And now we're going to have to work a little harder. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Mrs. Pickett?
Yes.
Mr. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Mrs. Richardson?
Yes.
Mr. Gear?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, before you adjourn the meeting, may I have a word with the planner?
Absolutely.
Just for a moment?
And one other thing, I just need a general consensus that schedule being proposed is generally acceptable.
And that is for item 2.
Item 2.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to hang tough here for a second. Okay, that concludes our meeting. Thank you all.